Hey everyone, welcome back to Crime Family. I'm your co-host AJ, and I'm here with my sisters Stephanie and Katie, and we're back with a brand new season of the show. This is season 6, so thank you so much for coming back to the show. It was a little bit of a longer break. I think we finished in May last year, so we had a few months to sort of chill out, relax, and now we're back with the new season. So Steph and Kate, how was your? Well, I mean, I know, but how was your breaks and stuff? Let our viewers know what's new, if anything.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. The break was definitely longer than I think we all expected, but life happens. A lot has happened since the break, so glad to be back. All is good.
Yeah, same. It was good. I kind of enjoyed having a longer break just to get my shit together and just life in general, being busy with kids and stuff. So it was nice to have the longer break, but I am glad to be back.
Yeah, same. Life happens. Yeah, we had a longer break than expected, but we're back now, so that's all that matters. So we're very excited because for the first 3 episodes of the new season, we are going to be kind of doing a deep dive into a particular topic of interest for us and also probably for many other people. So we are going to be talking about the drug and opioid epidemic that is currently, happening in Canada, the US, and really all over the world. But we have some special guests for our first couple of episodes that we're very excited to introduce you to. So for today's episode, we are joined by Brian Townsend, and he's a former DEA officer with years of firsthand experience on the front lines of the war against drugs. And Brian shares insights into some of the biggest challenges that is facing the DEA officers and law enforcement today, and shed some light on how we arrived at this critical point. Where the numbers are staggering, and where you lose in the US, there's over 100,000 people every year are lost to drug overdose. So we talk a lot about how we got here, what can be done. So in this interview, we discuss the systemic issues at play, the evolution of the opioid crisis, and potential solutions that could lead us towards a better future. So whether you're a concerned citizen, whether you're a policymaker, or you're just simply curious about this epidemic, I really do think that you'll find something of value in listening to this interview. Even if you're just a fan of the show, it was a really great interview that we did with Brian. So we're very excited to present that to you for the beginning of the season, and we are going to just hand it over to the pre-recorded interview. So we hope you enjoy it. So this is our interview with Brian Townsend. We have a special guest with us today we're very excited about. We have Brian Townsend, and he has many years of experience in law enforcement as well as the DEA, so the Drug Enforcement Agency. And he is here as an expert in the opioid crisis and all of the things that kind of go in with that. So we're very excited to have you on the show, Brian, to share with us your experience and your knowledge. And so thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be on.
So, to start off, would you be able to tell us about your experience in the DEA and how you got to that, and what led you to that path?
Yeah, so I spent 28 years in law enforcement. I was a police officer in Joplin, Missouri for 5 years, and I loved Joplin. It was a great city, great police department. But my goal, my dream was to be a special agent with the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. got hired and went to the academy and started my career and spent 23 years at DEA until my retirement a few years ago, and still involved with law enforcement, but no longer wearing a badge and gun. So now I'm just doing training. So, but I had an interest in DEA when I was in high school. Actually, I saw what drugs were doing to communities and decided that I wanted to be a part of some type of solution, and didn't know how I was going to do that. That the internet wasn't what it is today, and but I decided to go to college and be a criminal justice major, and that led to law enforcement, local law enforcement, like I said, the Joplin Police Department. And then ultimately, after about 4 years on, I realized that I felt like I had enough experience to take that next step. And after about almost 1 year process, like I said, I got hired, went to the academy. Our academy's in Quantico, Virginia, at the Marine Corps base next to the FBI academy. They have an academy there as well. Did a 17-week program. And after the academy, I got assigned to Little Rock, Arkansas, where I spent about 10 years. And then I went to Corpus Christi, Texas, and worked in Corpus Christi and the Southwest border for almost 7 years. And then I went to Quantico, Virginia, where I was in charge of most in-service training. And I was in management at the time. And in our management path, you have to, at some point, you have to go to headquarters. So that was my headquarters tour. And then in 2020, I had an opportunity to return to the field. So I went to Springfield, Missouri as the resident agent in charge. So I was in charge of the DEA office in Springfield and the 25 counties in Southwest Missouri that we cover. 2022 rolled around and I had a full retirement. And, I loved my job and I loved the people that I was working with and we had great relationships, but I just felt like I needed to do something different. And I was still young enough to do it. So pulled the plug, retired, and opened my own training and consulting business, Eagle 6 Training. Worked not only with law enforcement, but also businesses and organizations. And then that led to me working with the Mid-States Organized Crime Information Center, MOCIC. So I went to work with them part-time as a law enforcement training coordinator. And then they eventually talked me into a full-time job. So I do my own thing, training and consulting, and then I work for them training. And then I also started a nonprofit organization called Only 2MG. And that is purely dedicated to raising drug awareness, drug education, and really concentrating on the illicit fentanyl crisis. That's me in a nutshell.
It's interesting that you knew from high school what you wanted, and then you actually did that. I feel like that's rare. People in high school, their future doesn't turn out the way they were kind of planning. So it's kind of cool that you wanted that and then got that.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the stars aligned at times too. I didn't know that path. I didn't know how to get there. I just made some good choices and just kept that goal in my mind and got there. But yeah, absolutely. A lot of kids are, I don't want to say lost, but they're just, there's so many options available to them at that point in their lives. And things could have changed for me as well. Absolutely. But I was fortunate enough to stay on that path. And interesting story. I was a very average student, and my high school counselor at the time actually told me I should avoid college. That would be a waste of money for my family. So that was interesting. That would never happen in today's. And I'm not upset. I'm not bitter. But that would never happen in today's in school, right? When parents would demand a job with that. But yeah, so I went to school and got a couple degrees, and things worked out.
Awesome. So I guess to start off our conversation about the opioid crisis, from all your experience in the field that you have, what would you say? I know this could be a very long answer, which is fine, but what led us to where we are today with the crisis? So is there one or two main things that you can kind of pinpoint? What's your knowledge about that?
Yeah, if I had to pick one thing, it would be the opioid epidemic that started in the 1990s. So pharma convinced the medical community that we needed to prescribe more painkillers, more opioids. And they assured the medical community that they were safe, that they were free from addiction, or at least rare from addiction. And if you look back, and, now we have that luxury, right, to be Monday morning quarterbacks. But if you look back, they had a well-organized, well-funded campaign for probably 20 solid years, telling doctors that we need to treat pain differently. And that if we don't, we're being cruel to the folks that are suffering, and that they're being negligent. And they just kept on hammering this message. And there was a lot of factors involved and a lot of things they used, but ultimately it worked. We had 4 vital signs prior to 1996 in the medical community. We had your temperature, your breathing rate, your heart rate, and your pulse. Your blood pressure, your heart rate and your blood pressure, temperature and your heart rate. Yeah. And those are the 4 vital signs. Now, we treated pain prior to 1996, but statistically speaking, if you had an opioid prescription from a physician, you were probably dying or in some severe pain. And like I said, for probably a solid 20 years, we were reassured that these things weren't as addictive as we thought they were. And finally, in 1996, we added a 5th vital sign. We called it pain. And we now know that, in fact, there was a American Pain Society. They're now defunct, but they were completely funded by the pharmaceutical industry. Purdue, for instance, being they were the most provided the most funding in that organization. And from that day forward, we treated pain differently in this country, and that matters. From that day forward, if you went to the doctor, let's say you had wisdom teeth taken out after 1996, you probably went home with 30, 60, 90 hydrocodone pills. No questions asked. Prior to that, like I said, it was a big deal to have an opioid prescription. I'm not saying there wasn't some abuse or anything like that, but it was, as far as the medical community, it wasn't very common to have a opioid prescriptions prior to 1996 like that. And after 1996, we started giving it out like candy. We did. We absolutely gave it out like candy. And you can look at the numbers. You can go to the CDC website and you can track this stuff. By 2012, we had reached 81.3 prescriptions per 100 people in this country. Per 100, not per 100,000 or per 1,000,000, but per 100. So 81.3 prescriptions per 100 people.
Wow, that's a lot.
Absolutely.
That's crazy amount.
That's about 30 pills for every adult in the United States. And that's where it capped off. That's when it was about 2013 when our federal government, a lot of folks don't know this, actually declared an opioid epidemic. And we started to regulate these things, and we started to put different plans in action to monitor these better. And then, like I said, just regulate them. But the cat was out of the bag. We were handing opioids out like it was candy. And no questions asked, you were going home with 30, 60, 90 pills. So this had a devastating impact. And if you look at the number of people who die from drugs in this country, the government calls these overdoses. I call them drug poisonings. From 1968 to the year 2000, we lost about 208,000 people. And if you look where that, from 2000 on, the line just goes vertical, where we are now, 100,000 plus people every year. But where that line starts to turn vertical, that's where we started to dish out opioids like they were candy. So we started seeing people develop an opioid use disorder, an addiction to opioids. And then when they couldn't get enough opioids, or they wanted more opioids than what their physician would give them, they turned to the street, and they turned to heroin in record levels. And you can look at all the studies out there, National Institute of Drug Abuse. There's a ton of statistics out there that'll show you that about 80% of all heroin users started with legal opioid prescriptions. So we saw the number of people turn into heroin skyrocket. We hadn't seen those type of numbers since the Vietnam War. And then the traffickers said, hey, we have a product that we can cut into our heroin supply. And it's an opioid. It's synthetic, meaning it's all chemical. It's cheaper. It's a lot more potent. So they started adding fentanyl to our heroin supply. And then by about 2012, 2013 time period, we started seeing fentanyl in our entire heroin supply. And then ultimately it would just take over and pretty much replace heroin. So if, going back to the question, you think about one thing that really added to where we are today, it was the opioid epidemic. The fact that we were tricked by the pharmaceutical industry to believe that opioids were safe.
I think it's interesting too that pain is a vital sign, because that's like one thing that a doctor can't really confirm from the outside, being like, yeah, you do have that much pain. You can go in and act and scream and be like, yeah, I'm in pain, and they have to believe you. So I think that's one of like just the interesting like gray areas, be like, is it true? But you can't ignore someone in that much pain, right? So
It's subjective, right? It's how do you're going to call someone a liar? How do you measure that? You're absolutely right. There's not a blood test, or there's not a test that they can measure that with. They ask you what your pain is on a scale from 1 to 10, right? And that's it. And there are, I want to make it clear, there are people that are in pain that do need opioids. So, we don't want to neglect that. But the bigger problem is that we release these at record rates, and it had a devastating and profound impact, and it still is on this country. The numbers are lower now. We're about 36.5 prescriptions per 100 people in the country, and then you can dive into your states and your counties, and you can see where your problems are. And then you compare us to the rest of the world, and we treat pain differently in the United States than any other country in the world. Why? Can anyone answer that? And I'm not talking about third world countries. I'm talking about, Canada, England, Australia, high income, developed nations. Why do we treat pain so differently than these other countries? And it continues to have an impact on this country. And
yeah, like, so we're in Canada, and I know, like Vancouver, there's like crisis in Vancouver. So what's the difference between Canada and the US? Like, they're so close, we do everything so close together. So like, what's the biggest difference, I guess, between Canada and the US between opioid use, if you know those numbers?
I don't know your drug poisoning numbers. I know your laws are a lot more progressive as far as the penalties and things like that. So that has had some unintended consequences. We've seen more labs in Canada. We've seen growing problems in Canada because of it. I can't point to any, or I can't point to your overdose or your drug poisoning numbers, but certainly is impacting you as well. And the fact that we are neighbors, I'm sure that there's resources that the criminal organizations are sharing and trying to further their pocketbooks as well.
Another thing that we have here in BC, I'm in BC, they have like the safe drug, like injection sites, and they have safe drug supplies. What is your opinion on that? Do you think it's helping in the long run, hurting? I mean, we got here because opioids were legal, right? Yeah. So what's your opinion on that in general?
Not a fan. I think we need to address the core issues. I would rather see the money go to rehabilitation. I would rather see the money go to mental health. I would rather see the money go to recovery efforts. I don't want to see the money go to syringes. I don't want to see the money go to encouraging people to use drugs. I know these people are struggling, and I understand harm reduction, but if we're going to concentrate our efforts, I'd rather see those concentrated on finding the root cause of substance use disorder, addiction, and putting our efforts and our time and our resources towards that. So no, I'm not a fan of those things at all. And if you look at some of those locations, I'm not an expert in Canadian law, but it does appear that you guys are pulling the strings back a little, or covers back on that a little bit. And here in the US, I know we are as well. They've tried some of those things in places like Oregon. And now they've done a 180 on that, right? I mean, they're turning because they saw the impact, the negative impact that's having. We need to address the root cause of addiction as opposed to just encouraging it.
I guess.
Oh, Katie, go ahead.
Okay. This is a huge question, and it probably doesn't have a straight answer, but I guess what, in your opinion, is there a way to get out of this crisis? And like, what is that solution?
A lot of time and a lot of cooperation. I think that's a there's so many things we got to do. I mean, one is we got to reduce the stigma. We got to figure out how to get people to care. There's this misconception that drug use is a moral failing. And what people don't understand is substance use disorder, quote unquote addiction, is a disease that impacts our brain. But there's a stigma to it. We call them derogatory terms like, addict or junkie and things like that. And that creates a lot of shame. These words matter. And we know now through a lot of research that a lot of these folks aren't even looking for, or they won't seek help because of that shame, because of the way society looks at them. So I think we need to turn that around. I mean, if we were talking right now about 20 dolphins washing up on the beach every day, we'd all be up in arms. I mean, we'd all be texting $20 to the whatever organizations. We'd all be, our congressmen, our senators would be on the phone. But, in the United States, we lose one person every 5 minutes to drugs. Every 5 minutes. We lost 107,000 Americans last year to drugs. Like I said, the first 32 years of tracking this data, we lost 200,000 total in 32 years. We now lose 100,000 people every year. And we know 75%, or about 2/3 of those people, about 75,000, are because of one drug, fentanyl. But ultimately, who's really doing anything? I mean, and so I think that's one of the big things we need is we need a public awareness campaign, and we need people to care, have a little empathy. I'm not saying people should agree with drug use and there shouldn't be consequences for trafficking and using drugs, but we need to start giving a damn and start seeing how we can work together and find a solution here. That's the big one.
Yeah. Going to what you were saying about fentanyl, I know, do you think that an argument for a safe drug supply would be that it isn't laced with fentanyl, and because that's what's happening if it's getting on the black market or random drug dealers where they are lacing it with that? Do you think a safe drug supply is, I know you kind of said you don't agree, but is it part of a solution?
No, I don't think so. The problem with fentanyl is it only takes a little bit once it gets in your bloodstream to kill you. I mean, we're talking only, the average human being, only 2 milligrams. So I don't know how you make that safe. The problem is it's really not fentanyl that a lot of people struggling with substance use disorder are looking for. It's heroin, it's methamphetamine, it's cocaine, it's Percocet, it's Adderall, it's Xanax, you name the drug. And that's the problem with fentanyl. I mean, there are some people that are looking for pure fentanyl. They've developed that addiction to it. But where it's killing so many people is the unknowing, the unwitting. Like I said, it replaced heroin. And now when we do find heroin in the US, at least last year in 2023, 72% of all heroin we seized had fentanyl in it. 41% of all cocaine we seized by law enforcement had fentanyl in it. 17% of all methamphetamine we seized last year had fentanyl in it. And you look at the pills. I mean, the oxy pill, oxycodone, Adderall, Xanax, those are the three big. But if there's a pill, and by the way, it doesn't have to be an opioid. If there's a pill, there's a counterfeit. And if there's a counterfeit, there's a good idea there's fentanyl. So I don't know how you can make that a safe drug, because it really wasn't even supposed to be on our drug supply. It just took over. And that's where it has its impact is that it took over. People don't want it. There's no odor, there's no taste, there's no even distribution, there's no quality control, and only a mere 2 milligrams is enough to kill you.
And do you think, I guess, yeah, it makes sense, like you can't really have a safe supply of fentanyl that's not safe. But what about like if there was a safe supply of other drugs like heroin, cocaine that they knew wasn't laced? Like, do you think that plays a part in the solution or no?
I don't. And I think it goes back to my original answer of we're not addressing the root cause. I mean, one of the things you do if you struggle from substance use disorder, the ideal treatment is what we call medicated assisted treatment, MAT. So there's two things we're doing. One is we're trying to wean you off the actual drug you're taking. So you've probably heard like methadone clinics and things like that. That was for, heroin. Now we have drugs like Suboxone and other drugs for fentanyl. Well, the other part of the medicated assisted treatment is the cognitive behavior, therapy. What's the root cause? Are you struggling from trauma? Is there a sexual assault or a mental assault? Is there something in your life that's driving you to drugs or alcohol? And if so, let's solve those things so you don't go to drugs or alcohol to cope with those things. So I think, just like I said in the original answer, I think by allowing a safe supply of methamphetamine or coke or other drugs, we're not really targeting. I'd rather that money go to, like I said, the rehabilitation, the recovery, the treatment, things like that.
Do you think like the government needs to get more involved in trying to solve a solution, or do you think they could be the problem as well? I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, no, absolutely. I do. I think there's more things we can do. I mean, not just the United States government, but other governments. I mean, there's two things that we need to tackle. One is we need to reduce the demand for drugs. Okay, that's probably a whole different question and answer type thing. But the other thing is we need to figure out, now let's go out to the supply. So when you look at the supply, there's a couple countries that are problems. One is China. China sends the chemicals to usually Mexico, but they will send them to Canada. They will send them to the US, and they will send them to other nations as well. But typically it's to the cartels, to the Sinaloa cartel, the CDS, and the Jalisco New Generation, the CJNG in Mexico, where they'll mass produce fentanyl, just like they do with meth, and then they'll export it into countries, like the US and Canada. So, I think there are some things we could do. How do we turn the heat up on places like China and Mexico to stop this? And of course, we have been working with those countries. This isn't something new here. And this last president down in Mexico, AMLO, who's the outgoing president, he's Mexico's a sovereign nation. He's more concerned about his own citizens, and I get it, right? I mean, that's what you want your president to take care of its own citizens first, right? But this is also drugs are also having an impact down there as well, and I think there's some joint efforts that we can agree on and work with. So I'd love to see the international community and our governments do more to slow or eliminate the flow of chemicals and the precursor chemicals to make these dangerous drugs. So absolutely, I think the government can provide more funding. I hear politicians all the time, where we're going to get the money. Well, we found money to study the migration of a bird. Well, I tell you what, I'd rather find the money to fund a couple more beds and get people in treatment. So it's funny how we never can find money for those things, but we sure do find money for other pet projects out there and put politicians' names on buildings. It's backwards, and I think it goes back to the public awareness and the stigma that we have as a country. It's easier for them to not fund it because they can hide behind that stigma and say, why would we want to help those people? We got these other things that we can do. So absolutely, I think there's a lot more we can do on that front.
Yeah, and I think people don't want to think about it until it's in their backyard. There's a lot of people are like, oh, the tent cities are moving in closer. We got to do something, right? And they don't care until it's right there and they see it every day. So yeah, a big part of it, I think, is awareness and getting it out there in the media more. So I guess, like, why do you think it's not this huge uproar you see things in the media all the time about things that are very less important? And I guess do you think it's just that stigma? Like, nobody wants to think about it?
I really, truly think that has a big part of it. I think that when we have less empathy, it's not on our radar, right? We don't care. Why would we want to repair things that we don't care about? Look in our own lives. I mean, what are your priorities in your own life? It's things that you care about, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's human nature. And I think as a society, we just don't care.
So another thing, when you were talking about how the chemicals get across borders and they export, my question is, like, how do those huge quantities get across borders when, like, they're specifically looking for those kind of things? And, like, how do they smuggle it? How are they so successful with getting these things around the world when, like, people are specifically looking for these chemicals, these drugs, so that they don't get across the border.
Unfortunately, they're very good at it. They have decades of experience. They have the logistics down, whether it's whether it's just right across the border or whether it's via ocean. It doesn't matter. They're very, very good at it. And that's the thing with fentanyl. Fentanyl, there's nothing unique about the smuggling of fentanyl into the United States. They're using the same techniques that they've been using for decades, with cocaine, heroin, meth, marijuana for that matter. So this is just another drug, and part of the problem is it's look at pills. I mean, you can put 1 million pills and strap them to your body pretty easily. It doesn't take a lot of space to conceal a very high quantity of fentanyl. So they're very good at it. They're the southwest border in the United States is a huge problem. We've seen an uptake in that's the number one way drugs get into the country. If people don't know that, it's the southwest border. The same roads and highways that we would use to go to places like Reynosa or Matamoros or Tijuana are the same roads and highways that the cartels are using, and they're just very good at smuggling drugs across the border. And it's a problem down there. I'm not political at all, but we absolutely have a problem at our border. I spent almost 7 years, in Corpus Christi and then working along the border. So I spent a lot of time in the McAllen area and the Brownsville area, and I've seen it firsthand. And when people do get political, I say, hey, stop. You just go to the border. Just spend an hour. Your whole perspective is going to change. It's a mess. You go to the CBC, Customs and Border Patrol, the CBP, their website, and they track the number of what they call enforcement actions or contacts. For years, they would have 250, 300,000 people they would contact. And that would be also both sides of the border, Canada as well. You know how many contacts they do now on average? About 2 million a year. And we're not talking about increasing our resources, tenfold. We're talking about the same resources, but now dealing with 4 or 5 times as many people. And by the way, they're not all, you hear all these stories, they're just, really trying to get to America to get a better life. They're not all from Mexico. I mean, we have a ton of folks from China. We have a ton of folks from South America, a ton of folks from Asia, Africa, other continents. They know that our border is porous and it's very political. And this is an opportunity. And that's really sad because if you look at it, apolitically look at it, we've been doing border security in this country for 100 years in the United States. Since 1924, we've been securing our border. So you can all be for immigration. You can all be for allowing people to come in and, give them phones, give them healthcare, whatever. But you can also be for border security. There's a difference there. And the problem is we've meshed the two together and we've made it political. So now depending on whether or not you're, at least in the United States, if you're an R or you're a D, then all of a sudden that's where your stance is. And that's wrong. You got to look at it, more objectively than that.
Yeah. And I think going back to a little bit to what you were saying about stigma and all of that and working together, I think the problem is everyone has different, or everyone's on different sides of the coin, whether it's politically, and everyone has different ideas for solutions. So I think whatever side you're on, like if you're more for harm reduction or if you're more for like, rehabilitation and that kind of side, it's coming from a place of empathy regardless, a lot of times. So people have the same intentions, but just very different ideas about how to approach it.
Absolutely. And I don't fault anyone for throwing out these ideas and trying them. I think that's part of the solution, right? Is we sometimes throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what falls or what sticks is not the solution. But at this point, we're losing, like I said, we're losing one person every 5 minutes. We got to figure something out. So, again, to me, I'd rather concentrate those efforts on, the root cause of substance use disorder. But I want to hear their perspective. I want those people in the same room. I think we need to collaborate. And like I said, time and a coordinated effort is ultimately how I think we're going to get ourselves out of this. In law enforcement, for the longest time, it's always been this, we're just going to wrest our way out of it. And we know we can't do that. It's absurd to believe that. And So I realized pretty quickly that I've got to get out of my silo. I've got to get out of my little perspective, and I've got to open the door to other folks, and I've got to get on the phone, and I've got to get in the room, and I got to get into their meetings, and we've got to start figuring out, how do we solve this together? So I'm all for that. I'm all for getting different ideas and different perspectives in a room. Sure, some of them aren't going to work, but hey, you know what? Some of them might. And at this point, we need to collaborate and figure out what we're doing.
Yeah, because I think the point. Oh, sorry, Kate. I was just gonna say, because the reality is, while everyone sits in their silos, people are dying in the process, right? And it has to be, the more siloed you are, it's not going to solve the issues. So it's about coming together, for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going back to the border security and things. This I don't know if you can answer this or if you would want to, but how much corruption is in the government, do you think, or do you know, that allows these kinds of things to happen? Like, do you think the cartel is in the government in a way, kind of thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is a touchy one. Let me start with the U.S. government first. I think for the most part, we have a very professional United States law enforcement as a whole. I really do. Statistically speaking, you look at it, let's talk about the border. Are there some bad apples on the Border Patrol? Sure. Unfortunately, and they're doing their best to weed them out. But the 99.999% of the Border Patrol, the men and women are hardworking, good individuals who really just want to go do their job and make this country safer. So I think on the United States side, that's actually not a huge problem. I'm not trying to be naive. I'm not trying to, the thin blue line or anything like that. There's no evidence to suggest differently. Now let's go across the border. It's a problem. It really is. And then you look at the last 6 years, AMLO, the outgoing president down there, he's done a lot of damage to our efforts. We worked with vetted teams and things like that, and he's really made that job difficult. Like he wants a lot of the information to route through certain channels, and we can't do that. We just can't do it. So we have a lot of success down in Mexico. And I can't speak for DEA today, but I've only been retired for a couple of years, and I do have a lot of experience with this. But I can say that there are a lot of people on the south side of the border who are risking their lives to make Mexico safe. And if you've ever been down there, it's a beautiful country, beautiful people. And it's sad that the corruption is so widespread, and the violence is so widespread, and that the cartels have so much control down there. Then you go back to his presidency. I mean, he has the most violent presidency in the history of Mexico. There's like 150,000 documented people who died in Mexico in the last 6 years. That's absurd. And then he has this hugs, not bullets policy. And I get it. Let's find some other solutions. But come on, sometimes you got to be hard. Especially, we're not talking about someone who's selling a gram of coke to buy their own, dope, their own drugs. We're talking about cartels. I mean, we're talking about the highest level here. There needs to be severe consequences. We need to aggressively go after these people and put them in prison forever. And throw away the key. And it's just frustrating. And then, there are some articles, this isn't me speaking. This is, I think New York Times did one, Washington Post did one. There's some articles out there about some of the alleged money from the cartels that might or might not be going to high level Mexican officials. And again, this is not me speaking here. You can Google those things and you can read those articles. So it does make you wonder, who really is pulling the strings down there? But yeah, my entire career, we had problems with corruption on the south side of the border, but thankfully, worked with a lot of amazing people down here who are, when I say they're risking their lives, I mean, they're risking their lives and the lives of their families to work with us and to go after these dangerous criminals, these violent criminals, and make their country safer.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask as well, because you said, the amount of drugs that are getting over the border, because the people doing it are very experienced, very good at it, very creative. I don't know if you can answer this, but what are just like logistically, how are some of the ways they're doing it? Like if someone is I don't even know. Like if someone is in a car driving across the border and they're smuggling drugs, like how does it happen? I don't know.
Cars and trucks is the primary way. The sexy or the interesting things are always the drones or the tunnels and things like that. And those things exist as well. But the easiest way, the most dominant or most common way, I should say, that drugs are smuggled into the United States is cars and trucks. They put them in false compartments. They put them in voids. They put them in the gas tank. They put them in tires. It's pretty ingenious on some of the way they conceal these drugs. It really is. Sometimes they'll put them in other products. We might have a truck with produce on it. Maybe you think there's watermelons in it, but there's really cocaine or methamphetamine or marijuana. But trucks and cars are the most common way that we see drugs. And like I said, we have seen, or we do see drones, we see tunnels, the oceans, we see all kinds of vessels, whether it's just a boat, a go fast boat, or whether it's a submarine. I mean, we've seen it all. So catapults, we've seen some interesting ways people will get drugs into the United States. But again, going back to the most common way is just put them in your car, put them in your backpack, put it in a bag. But a lot of times they will try to conceal them somewhat from the Border Patrol and hide them in a false compartment or behind the dashboard or, in a battery or something like that.
And I guess that leads to my next question is, because a lot of times, whether it's someone in a cartel or just someone doing it, but like drug mules, people who are convinced to smuggle drugs across the border. Like we've seen cases. There was an example here in Canada of a woman who, it was like an online romance scam, but they were just, she ended up being a drug mule unknowingly. And some people do it knowingly. So what's your experience with drug mules and how that kind of happens, how someone's convinced to do that?
Money. They get desperate and they want the money. So, when I worked in Corpus Christi, we had two what we call checkpoints. So if you've never been to the southern U.S. border, we have, border entries and then we have checkpoints. And we had two very busy checkpoints, Falfurrias and in Sarita on Highway 77 and Highway 281. And if you look at the map, those two highways just go straight north into the United States, or at least up through Texas. And then from there, they can get anywhere. But, we arrested a number of mules, drug, people transporting money. I mean, every day we were working with the Border Patrol and seizing drugs. Money is the ultimate motivator, right? That's why people do these things. There's no, I'm going to help humankind and I'm going to put drugs everywhere. I mean, this is all about money from all different levels, whether they're smuggling it, whether they're manufacturing it, whether they're selling it, it's all about money. So, that's the biggest motivator. I don't know that I've ever seen any other motivator other than money.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. What you said, like people get desperate enough, they'll do anything, and there's a lot of money to be made in that.
And for some people, they feel like it's easy money, right? Why go work, at a fast food place when I can smuggle, 5 keys of cocaine over the border and, make more than I'd make in a couple months, working a 9-to-5 job. And so it's that quick, it's that lottery, right? It's that quick fix, if you will. And unfortunately, there's a lot of, severe consequences when you get caught. You go to prison often, and it's not worth the risk.
Yeah. And it's just wild to me that someone can get that desperate. Like I couldn't even imagine thinking that would even be a good idea for even a second. Like, the consequences are so severe they ruin your whole life just for that quick pay day, I guess. So yeah, it's just wild to me.
And
me too. You and I will never be drug traffickers because I have no interest in going to prison. I've been on the other side of the bars doing a lot of interviews and have no interest in breaking the law.
Yeah, and I've seen documentaries where former or like current drug mules are interviewed and they say that they really don't have any other options. They live in countries where they manufacture these kinds of drugs, and if they want to make any kind of living, then that's what they have to do, is like traffic and smuggle these kind of drugs around to support their families. Like, these are family people. And so whether that's completely true or, you know, just the easiest kind of job for them to have, I feel like as long as there's money, that this drug epidemic is never going to end, right? I mean, no one's going to stop smuggling if they can make money. No one's going to stop making it if they're going to make money. So I think that's, just follow the money, basically. So I don't know. I'm being very pessimistic. Like, oh, it's never going to stop as long as money exists. But I don't know.
Well, people do. I think that's the cop out, though, for a lot of people, that, I need to feed my family. There are other ways. I mean, all the four of us, right? We could all be drug dealers, and that would be the easiest way to feed our families, right? But we choose not to, because morally or ethically, and we don't want to go to jail. But I think bigger than that is, why are they doing it? Now, and I don't mean the money part, but let's talk about the demand part. I can demonize the cartels all day long, or we all can, and the traffickers and the different people, but they're doing this because of one reason: simply economics. Our demand for drugs in the United States is unlike any other in the world. I mean, it's absurd. And if we could figure out how to reduce our demand, that's ultimately part of the solution, really. Then they would put them out of business just naturally, right? I mean, if we all produced a widget and no one wanted it, guess what? We're no longer producing widgets, right? I mean, we have to find something else to do. But they have a product that they know we want. And not only do we want it in record levels. And that'll always have that carrot there for them to go after.
So why is it so huge in the US? We may have touched on this already, but is it because there was never these like legal pill mills in other countries, and it's just kind of like that's just where it happened in the US? Or is there something in like the psychology of US citizens that is making them more depressed and desperate? Or what do you think?
Well, I think the mental illness part is something I think that, of course, that impacts everyone across the world, right? I mean, we're all struggling from different things, but I don't think we manage that very well globally, especially not in the US as well. And I think a lot of people turn to drugs and alcohol. We know a lot of young people do, certainly, because of mental health conditions. That's a big part of it, right? Just the mental health aspect and what we can do to address that. You go back and you look at the entire drug history of the United States. I mean, the first time we ever saw widespread addiction in this country was during the Civil War. We had these horrific injuries, these amputations, and we started handing opium and morphine out like it was candy, like we did in the 1990s. And it scared us. It really did. But then we saw more and more of these drugs, the opium, the morphine, and then, heroin, and then cocaine in the late 1800s. And we just fell in love with these drugs. And it goes back to almost the simple economics where, we just started abusing them at record levels. And then it wasn't until really the early 1900s when we started to regulate these things. But the cat was out of the bag. We liked it too much. And then over the years, like I said, when you throw on the mental illness part of the problem, it just compounds it. Now they know that, okay, there is a substance I can go to that'll make me feel better when I'm depressed or when I have anxiety or when things are going bad in my life. And they know what they can turn to, and they turn to drugs and alcohol at record levels. And we see that with kids all the time.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting and scary things about opioids is that it actually changes your brain chemistry. So your dopamine levels are completely gone. And so how do you recover from that? I'm sure it takes years to get back, if you ever can get back to what you were before your chemistry changed. Like, that's the scary part of it, is that you're actually physically could be mentally changed because of these drugs.
Especially our young people, and that's just not opioids. That's all drugs. That's even alcohol. It's marijuana. We know that brain development happens until our mid-20s. So the more that we use drugs and alcohol when we're young, the more changes that we're making to our brain. And that's not healthy. That's not safe. The good news is there's a lot of people out there who are in long-term recovery, who are very productive members of our society. and who have beat substance use disorder, who have beat addiction. And that's a wonderful thing. And I think that's a great reason not to give up hope on people is we can beat this. We can get people help. And they can, like I said, turn their lives around and be productive members of society.
Going to your earlier point about addressing the root causes, I think it's, if you look at people who are addicted to drugs, probably the vast majority have some type of trauma in their life, in their early life or later life, but something leading them. Like, people don't just wake up one day and they're like, oh, I'm going to just take a drug right now. It's like, there's usually a root cause. So, it's just addressing those root causes and like intervening before they turn to drugs, because maybe the other treatments didn't work. Maybe they never received the other treatments. And I think the stigma goes along not just with addiction, but like trauma in general. People are going to actively open up and speak about it and get help, and it can lead them to turning to addiction later. So that's super important too.
100% agree with you. That's a huge issue, and it's part of that root problems that we need to solve. And you look at all the studies out there and all the statistics and all the research they've done. A number of people who struggle with substance use disorder have documented mental health conditions. A high number of people, and these are typically conditions that we're just not addressing. Whether the person's not seeking the treatment themselves, or whether it's not recognized, or for whatever reason. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. A lot of these folks are turning to drugs and alcohol. And there's a study out there. I forget the name of the company that did it, but 44% of all teenagers feel persistent feelings of sadness and loneliness. 44%, and that was as of last year, or 2022. I'm sorry. So, and then they follow it up with, what do you turn to when you're feeling sad or lonely? Drugs or alcohol? I mean, I'm not laughing because that's funny. I'm laughing because it's sad. I mean, that's the reality is that root cause really is. I mean, there's many things that we need to do. Like I said, we need to reduce the demand. We need to go after these high level traffickers. We need to do the public awareness campaign, but we got to figure out how to help people, because if not, we're just going to keep on having this problem longer and longer and longer, and more people are going to continue to die and suffer.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it goes back to when we talked about the pain aspect of it. I mean, when I had my first child, I was prescribed oxycodone just because I had a C-section in the hospital. And I had no idea what this drug was. I never took it because my mom was like, oh my God, don't fill that prescription. Don't take it. And I didn't need it. I wasn't in that much pain. But now that I'm looking back, I'm like, that could have been me, right? Like I could have, want to be one of those people that just got addicted to that. And so just a simple, innocent thing like that puts people over the edge all the time.
It can, right? And there are a lot of people out there, maybe even yourself, where you could have taken a pill or two and been okay. Certainly we don't want to suggest that it's going to absolutely turn to addiction, but you're right. I mean, and that's the perception we have too, right? I mean, I lost my father to cancer a couple of years ago, and in the final months of his life, they wanted to give him opioids, and it was for quality of life. And my dad and my mom were afraid. They're like, what if we get addicted? And I had to have and I was at DEA at the time. I had to have a conversation with my dad and say, Dad, time out here. You're dying. You got stage 4 cancer. We want to increase the quality of your life. We're not looking to, you're not going to go homeless and things aren't going to go, spiral for you. Let's worry about your health at this point, and your quality of life at this point. But, I'm the same way, like with your story there with the I wasn't pregnant, but when I've had opioid prescriptions, I'm always that person that says, oh, do I really need this? Can I just take some Tylenol or just kind of get over the pain, and because I have heard the stories. I can tell you a lot of stories where people have, not your stereotypical drug user, who are just people that are hospitalized for different reasons, and they just fall into it. They get that opioid prescription, and then life forever changes for them. And it's heartbreaking. And that's when you go back to the very first question you asked me about, what kind of triggered all this, and the fact that the pharmaceutical industry reassured the medical community that these things were safe. They lied. 100% lied. And they fooled us as a nation, and it's continuing to have devastating consequences. And that's a bad thing. And the struggle too is the fact that there are people out there that need opioids and it helps, but there's a lot of people where it hurts as well. So how do you distinguish? It kind of goes back to what you're saying. How do you know when someone has pain and when they don't, right? That subjective feeling.
Yeah, it's good. The point that you mentioned, because I was wondering too with like Purdue Pharma and like big pharma, I was like, didn't know. I'm like, did they really not know, but they knew for sure 100%. Yeah.
Well, when you look, there's a lot of shows. Hulu has one. I think Netflix has one. There's a bunch of shows out there. There's several books. I've read most of them, seen the shows, and some of it obviously takes a little bit of liberties here and there, but some of it's pretty accurate. If you look at some of their freedom, I'm not sure what they call it in Canada, but in the United States, the Freedom of Information Act, where you can dive into a person's emails and things like that. When they look at some of the internal documents at Purdue, they talked about how their original patient, if you will, was going to be a cancer patient, like my father, ideal patient, but then they realized that was too small of a pool. We needed to reach a little further than that. And then that was just opioids for everyone. And, you look at, I gave you all the numbers from 2012 was a peak, but if you look at the numbers, how they jumped up from 1996, it makes you want to throw up. It's just disgusting. By 2004, OxyContin was the most abused pharmaceutical on the street. I mean, we called it heroin in a pill in law enforcement at the time. They went from a 10 to a 20 to a 40 to an 80 to 160 milligram pill. This is a powerful narcotic. Shame on them for what they've done. And you just follow the whole Sackler family and everything that's gone on with them. And they weren't alone. Purdue is certainly the worst actor of all of them, but they weren't alone. But shame on them. I don't know how they sleep at night. I really don't.
Yeah. Corporate greed, and going back to Katie's point with money, like as long as money exists, there's going to be bad actors that will take advantage, and they don't even care who they're impacting, who dies, and what the repercussions
and that's
are. Like, because they might not even feel the repercussions in the way that like a regular person on the street would.
Yeah, and that's that Netflix show I think called Painkiller. I think all three of us saw it. That's kind of what I'm thinking about this entire conversation, because I don't know if that's, I feel like a lot of that is accurate because I've looked up some of it afterwards and like it is very factual. But the repercussions from that company, like didn't really go to jail, did they? I mean, they went bankrupt, so they couldn't pay anything back. Like, why are they not criminally responsible for knowingly, feeding this epidemic?
Well, some people are going to tell you because ultimately the individual responsibility is on the person himself, right? And I do agree a little bit with that. I mean, we have to reduce the demand. We have to stop people from wanting. So there needs to be some accountability for the people. But going back to Purdue, you're absolutely right. And at some point, there's got to be some ethical decisions, right, that are being made. Like, when is enough enough? When are we going to do the right thing, right? 2007, a couple of their executives got in trouble for lying, and there's a lot of speculation on why that case got settled the way it did. But ultimately, that's what happened. It got settled. The company paid it was about a $615 or $20 million loss or settlement. What's $600 million to a company that made $35 billion on one drug? I mean, that's if we all lost a quarter today. Like, is that really going to, are we going to struggle because of that, right? No, we're not. I mean, it was a slap on the wrist is what it was. Most of in the United States, we have opioid settlement money. There's like $26 billion, I believe, over the next 18 years to most of our states, not all of them, but most of them who participated in the lawsuit. None of that comes from Purdue. Purdue has an interesting story there. Ultimately, they did settle with the United States government for about $6 billion, but then that got challenged and it went all the way up to our Supreme Court. And then I believe it was June of this year, our Supreme Court said, we're going to throw that settlement out. So a lot of folks it's kind of 50-50 really. Some folks are unhappy because they wanted Purdue they wanted that money. They wanted that $6 billion as part of the settlement money. But then some people are really happy because now they feel like they can sue the Sackler family until they die in court. and I've heard that a lot. We want them to die in court, quote unquote. A lot of folks don't realize also that naloxone, which is Narcan, the life-saving drug that reverses opioid overdoses. In Europe, you can Google this, and there's a couple different news articles out there that'll show you that in Europe, the Sackler family is actually involved in making money on that as well. So, which really is disgusting when you think about that. I mean, they helped pump the United States full of opioids. They made billions of dollars off of it. And, they moved all their money overseas, and then they tried to settle with the government so they could protect the rest of their assets. And they just continue to make money through these really, what kind of ethical decisions are they making there?
Yeah. And for like a person going up against a big pharmaceutical company or like a series of people, that's a scary thing, that pharmaceutical company can sue you from here to tomorrow, billions of dollars. So it's like almost you have no leg to stand on, you feel, if you're just a singular person or like group of people taking on this big pharmaceutical company. But I wanted to ask about, one of the questions was, what like demographic or geographical areas in the US do you see are most impacted by the opioid epidemic? Like I've seen documentaries and stuff that will focus on like little pockets of America, like small towns that are super impacted by the opioid crisis. And I always wonder like what makes some towns more susceptible or more impacted than larger areas or something like that. So in your experience, what is the geographical and demographics of people most impacted?
Historically speaking, early on in the mid 1990s, it was places that had high careers with blue collar type labor. So that's why we saw a lot of it in places like West Virginia, the coal mines, Ohio, the Northeast. We saw a lot of careers that are typically people, working outdoors or with higher levels of potential injury than other career fields. So to them, that was kind of a target environment. If you're more likely to get injured in the line of your work, well, here we are with the pill that's going to make you feel safer, right? Or feel better. So early on, we certainly saw that, and West Virginia really climbed up. If you look at their overall number, they still lead the nation in drug poisonings. I think it's 80 or 90 people per 100,000, which is much higher than even second place. But now opioids, they don't see a demographic, rich, poor, white, black, it doesn't matter. This stuff does not discriminate. It is an equal opportunity killer. Where we're seeing it hurt the most people is our young people, that 14 to 18 demographic. And the reason we see that is, well, some common sense, really. If you tried drugs or alcohol in your life, you were probably a teenager. Your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, if we were to poll them and they were honest about it, if they tried drugs or alcohol in their life, they were probably teenagers, right? I mean, that's when we experiment with things in our lives. The problem now is kids are growing up with a drug that we didn't have when we were their age. I didn't have fentanyl in my drug supply. Not that I took drugs, but in the drug supply out there when I was 14, 18 years old. So that demographic is getting destroyed. In fact, if you look at their numbers per 100,000, they've grown higher than any other everyone keeps on talking about the 18 to 45 population, how they're dying the most. Well, first of all, 18 to 45 is pretty darn broad, right? I mean, that's like saying all white people or all black people or all Asian people. That's pretty broad. Let's narrow it down a little bit, right? So that's why I looking at that I hate that it impacts them. But when you look at that 14 to 18-year-old demographic, they're really getting pounded because that's when they're trying drugs and they just don't know. No one's given this information. They're not getting it at home. They're just not, they have no idea that one pill can kill, that the first time you use a drug, you can die. They have fentanyl that is sprinkled throughout the drug supply and they're experimenting with drugs and boom, they're dying from first-time drug use. So that is the demographic that we're most worried about is young people. And that's why a lot of my efforts are concentrated on that demographic. But other than that, like I said, this drug will kill anyone and everyone.
Yeah, and that's the scary thing too is, someone can take drugs for the first time in their life and die because the little piece of a pill or the pill they had a tiny bit of fentanyl. And it's almost think it's like, if you took a pill and cut it in four, it's like playing Russian roulette with it because you don't know how much fentanyl is in that one piece that you have, because it's not going to be distributed evenly, right, amongst the pill, right? So that's what I think of when I think of that.
No, you're absolutely right. And we have some new evidence that just came out on that. We know domestically speaking, a lot of pills are also made in the US and Canada for that matter. And what we see is typically the powder, the actual fentanyl itself is typically manufactured in Mexico. And then at some point a pill's made. When pills are made in the US, the distribution is totally uneven. We call it the chocolate chip cookie effect. We're all eating chocolate chip cookies. The first bite, we don't get a chocolate chip. Maybe we do the second bite. And there's a lot of instances out there where people are taking pills, splitting them in half, and one person dies and the other one doesn't because, like you said, no even distribution. Interestingly enough, we are seeing some even distribution from the cartels. We're seeing a lot more, and this is all within the last couple months. We're seeing a lot more quality control. I want to be careful, not quality control. We're still seeing high levels and unknown level. I mean, we see pills that have 0 fentanyl in them. We see pills that have 15 milligrams of fentanyl in them. So the broad spectrum, how much fentanyl is in them. But it's interesting when I know when DEA has been doing random testing from, especially from the large 2 cartels that are responsible for most of the fentanyl into the United States, and they'll cut those pills into quads, into 4 pieces. And shockingly, they're doing a lot better job on the distribution. So as opposed to half a pill killing one person, now it'll kill both people. They're evenly distributed, and that's where they're failing. One is they're cartels, so they're always going to fail. But they are getting better on the distribution part, but there's certainly still no quality control or no rationale for what they do. So
are they not thinking about maybe we shouldn't be killing all of our customers, or is it really just about the addiction and like people want this, so we're going to give it to them, whether they die or not, there's always going to be somebody else? Is that like they're thinking probably?
Yeah, and I get that question a lot is why would they kill their people, right? Why that's not good for business, right? You want your customers to come back. Ultimately, they're making more customers than they're killing. And I know we look at it like, how's that even possible? And it is, because this stuff costs them pennies to make. So yeah, we're losing 107,000, at least in the United States, people every year, but they're gaining customers left and right. You could give an entire classroom a free pill. And there are locations in the United States where you can get free fentanyl with a telephone number. And yeah, I might kill 25% of the people I give those pills to, but guess what? That other 75%, I'm probably going to have some repeat customers there. And I'm going to make a lot more money because this stuff is pennies to make. The profit margins are incredibly high. As long as the money outpaces the client mortality is what we call it, then that's all they care about. Drug traffickers they're soulless. They don't care about people. They're not doing this because they want to help people. They want to do this because they're putting money in their pocket. So as long as they can put more money in their pocket, do they want their customers to die? Probably not. But that only impacts them if it impacts their money. Like I said, they're soulless. That's why we don't see things like car fentanyl too much in the world. It's out there, but car fentanyl is when 100 people die in a day. Okay, if I'm a drug trafficker, I can't have that because now that impacts the money going into my pocket. So that's I know it was hard for me to understand, right? Why would they sell a drug that they don't do any type of quality control? Why would they sell a drug that can kill people the first time they use it? And it just simply they're making more money on it from the folks that don't die.
Yeah, because if they ever did have fewer clients, they could just charge more. They're in control of the market. They can charge however much they want, and the clients will find a way to get that money to them. So
yeah,
it's hard to think of it from our perspective because we have empathy and we have souls. So it's hard to think, you can't really put yourself in the mind of someone who doesn't have any of those things.
Also, do you think the drugs like Narcan are making a difference if somebody overdoses or from fentanyl, they get revived? Does that change their mindset? As in, oh, like I did almost die. I was very close. Do the majority of the people rethink about their decisions, or are they just too caught up in the addiction cycle that it really, they're just going to do it again and again?
Unfortunately, they're struggling with the substance use disorder. I think the drug is making a difference, absolutely making a difference. If we didn't have naloxone's been around, by the way, since like the 60s, late 60s, but we haven't really seen it in mainstream until the last 10 years or so, right? And now most police officers and first responders are carrying it. It's not just something that you see in hospitals anymore. So that absolutely makes a difference, 100%. Last year alone, we handed out, not we, but the companies who make this stuff, about 22 or 23 million doses, I believe. So we don't know how much of this is being used. That stuff the government's trying to track those numbers a little bit better, but that's really difficult. But to the second part of your question, unfortunately, that would all it would take for me. If I'm almost dead, yeah, I'm going to be second questioning a lot of things in my life, right? But the reality of it is they're struggling. Substance use disorder, like I said, it's a disease that really that impacts the brain, and they don't see it that way. There are people out there who tell you that they don't care. Let me be careful here. I don't want to say they don't care. They know they're destroying relationships. It makes them sad, but the need for the drug is compulsive. It's a need for the drug. So yeah, they don't want to hurt mom or dad or siblings. They don't want to steal. They don't want to be arrested. They don't want to overdose. But the need for the drug is powerful, and it's pushing them into continuing to do this. That's why they need help, right? So unfortunately, a lot of folks who are being revived by naloxone sadly go back into the same type of environment or behavior. And again, until we start going after that root cause and helping these people, and I know that's frustrating. I know a lot of police officers who have revived the same people multiple times, and they, like, what are we doing, right? I mean, you just got to remind yourself that you're saving a life, and maybe it's that third time where the light switch goes off, and that person does get the help they need, right, and does turn their life around. But I think it's also, like I said, just a reminder of how powerful addiction is to people.
Yeah, like even if the person you save with naloxone, whether they wake up and get treatment the next day or in 5 years, but they're able to get that treatment because you saved them with the naloxone. So, and I don't know in the US what it's like, but I know in the city I'm in, like in Toronto, you can get naloxone at like a pharmacy for free. Like you can go and they'll give you some naloxone, which is a great thing. And in here we have the Good Samaritan laws, which I know they have in the States too. Can you explain a little bit what the Good Samaritan laws are?
Yeah, so the Good Samaritan laws allow people to call for emergency assistance when they need it without the fear of arrest. So let me give you an example. We worked a case, I can't say where, but we worked a case where some kids were partying, and they were taking drugs and alcohol, and they were, obviously drugs are illegal, but they were also underage. They weren't supposed to be drinking either. And one of the kids overdosed. So they freaked out, right? They're kids. They didn't know what to do. So instead of calling 911 or instead of taking this individual to a emergency room, they snuck him into his parents' house, into his bedroom where he died in bed. And his mom and dad found him the next morning. Horrific situation. Good Samaritan laws are supposed to prevent this. They're supposed to allow those kids in that particular situation, for anyone for that matter, to call 911, call emergency assistance and say, I need help. My friend, myself, whoever is overdosed or needs some type of emergency assistance. And they can do that without the fear of themselves going to jail or some type of criminal consequences for it. So that's the idea. In the United States, I believe we're now up to 59 states have Good Samaritan laws on the books.
And that's the idea, right? To allow people to call for help, because we don't want people to say, hey, I would help you, but I don't want to go to jail, so therefore you're going to die. That's silly, right?
Are you seeing that those laws are making a difference?
Yeah, I think so. The problem is, if you're 18 years old and you're partying with your friends, and one of your friends goes down, it's one thing to have a law like that, but one is, do you know it exists? Number two is, do you trust it, right? That's why we still see countless numbers of they'll pull up to an emergency room, one foot's on the gas or on the brake, they open the door, they push the person out, boom, they take off, right? So at least they feel like they did something, but they didn't want to stick around because they feared the consequences to what was happening. I have seen a little tiny bit of research, not a lot. I haven't really dug into it too much, but I have seen a little bit that it does help people. I think that's what it's intended to do, is ultimately allow people to call for emergency assistance without the threat of arrest or any type of consequences. So I think that's a good thing. I have no problem with that. So, and ultimately, I got to tell you, from a law enforcement perspective, if it's kids partying, come on. What are we going to do? Are we going to put them all in jail, right? That's just doesn't happen. But also, if we do feel like there's something more there, well, there might be some things that we can do in the law enforcement community to further, the criminal intelligence or learn more about the drugs or something like that doesn't even involve the folks that we were dealing with. You know what I mean? So I don't think I hope nobody hates those laws. I don't think they hurt anything.
So I wanted to talk a little bit. I know you have a nonprofit, so it's called Only 2 Milligrams. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
So I started a nonprofit organization. It's recognized by the Internal Revenue Service as a 501(c)(3). So we are a full-blown nonprofit organization, and we are retired DEA agents, the entire board of directors, and I'm the executive director. And right now I'm the only teacher. Hopefully we will be able to expand eventually and have more law enforcement officers doing drug presentations. I have 3 presentations right now. I have a very comprehensive 4-hour presentation where I give you the kitchen sink. I really break apart the history. And we talk about the cartels, we talk about China, we talk about social media, we talk about the dark web. You name it, we talk about it. It's fentanyl related. Everything is up to date. All my research, I back it with sources. I try to make it individualized to the area that I'm speaking in. But that's I've done that now 82 or 83 times across the United States, with several more scheduled. I have a 1 hour, what we call a lunch and learn. And that's more for the folks that are like, hey, look, I want to learn about fentanyl, but I don't have 4 hours, So I call that kind of the executive lunch and learn, where I'm going to give you about 30 or 40 minutes of just high level stuff. And then we're going to talk for 15 or 20 minutes and do some Q&A. And then I have an hour long presentation that I actually call Shattering Dreams. And I do that for students. Some schools will not give you an hour. That's a long time for students. So a lot of times I'm aiming for, college students or schools that will give you that time. But that is just, here's the real deal. 2 milligrams is going to kill you. And this is where it is. This is the pills. This is the coke. This is the meth. This is the heroin, et cetera, et cetera. And the goal on that one is to just educate people, empower them to make their own decisions, especially young people. Give them the information that I wish other people was given them. I wish their parents. I wish there were good sources of information coming in. But give them the information, empower them to make hopefully the correct decision, which is not to use these drugs. So we, like I said, we do these presentations everywhere. I'll come to Canada. I happily come to Canada. I've been up there a few times. I like to hike, so been to a couple areas up there. So you can invite me. But in all seriousness, though, I enjoy traveling and I enjoy giving this message, and I think it's important because a lot of folks just don't have any clue on how impactful this is. We're in an illicit fentanyl crisis. Make no mistake about that. We are in a crisis, and we need to do something about it.
Honestly, I think this drug awareness should be a part of school curriculums. Like I have a daughter that just is starting middle school, and it like terrifies me that these drugs are, they're out there. And I mean, she's only 11, but she's coming up to the age where, people start experimenting, right? And I don't know, like I remember when we were in school, they kind of had like the DARE program. Like I don't know if that's a thing that's across country in Canada, that they would have these kind of awareness anymore. Like they should really show like the dark side of these kinds of drugs. Like, I mean, people smoke weed, they think it's cool. It's just like a cool, fun thing to do drugs sometimes. And I just think that I don't think kids have it in their heads how dangerous it is until it's too late. So yeah, I really think it would be an important thing to have just in every curriculum.
I agree. And there are a lot of states, and I'm sure there's probably some places, I would be surprised if there weren't in Canada, that are requiring and mandating it now. I know several states are requiring that in the school curriculums, and I think that's a wonderful thing. Ideally, these discussions are going to happen at home. And that's one thing when I talk to parents, I try to tell people how to parent, but I absolutely recommend talking to their children, age specific, depending on, how old they are, on, not only drugs or alcohol, but all the different things they're going to face in life. Sex, violence, let's be parents and have these conversations. Right. And I could tell you, that's a frustration. When I first got into this, I was so excited about talking to parents. And I had a friend of mine who was like, less than 1% of parents are going to show up to your presentations. And I'm like, whatever. They've never seen me speak, right? First time it happened, I had 6 parents show up. 6. I mean, the stories I won't tell you what school district, but I had a large school district in the United States who was like, we want you to come in. We're going to have several experts come in. We're going to have an expert on drugs. That's going to be you. We're going to have an expert on teen pregnancy. We're going to have an expert on suicide. We're going to have an expert on child predators online. We're going to have an expert on nutrition. I mean, a whole host of things for families to learn about that impact adolescents, right? That's good. And then they're like, we know parents work, we know they're busy. So we're going to do 2 of these things. We're going to do one on a weeknight, and we're going to do one on a weekend day. So one was like on a Wednesday night, and one was like on a Saturday, like at 1:00 in the afternoon. So depending on your schedule, if you're in town, you might be able to make one of these things, right? We had 17 parents show up total. And that's the reality. Until this impacts you, you probably don't give a damn. And I think that goes back to the part where, and this was beyond drugs though. This wasn't just the stigma of drug use. This was, again, suicide prevention, teen pregnancy, all these different things that are great resources that were free to these families. Why is that? Why aren't we having these conversations, right? And why aren't we taking advantage of these resources that are being provided? Because I guess what, when something happens, who do you think's going to get the blame? Why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you, tell us about, little Johnny or little Sally or whatever, right? But that's a huge, huge problem is the disconnect between people that are getting the correct information. And what I tell these families is, guess what? If you're not having these conversations with your kids, someone else is. Whether it's their goofy friends, whether it's social media, whether it's the drug traffickers or these predators, someone is going to have these conversations with your kids. So why wouldn't you want to give them the accurate information now? Because I've had parents tell me, "Oh, it's out of sight, out of mind. I want to put my head in the sand. That way, if they don't hear about drugs, they'll never use them." And it's absurd to even hear that. I have heard that parents tell me that, and I can't believe it. I refuse to accept that that's the truth, and because I know it's not the truth, right? Out of sight, out of mind does not make sense to me.
No, it definitely doesn't.
But yeah,
kids are learning this kind of things. If not from us, like you said, then from somebody else that is not going to have maybe their best interests.
Yeah, you're not like speaking it into existence by talking about it. It already exists. And it's going to exist whether you talk about it or not. So you might as well talk about it.
Yeah, just because they don't hear it from you doesn't mean they're never going to hear it. Like that's the exact opposite.
100%.
It kind of like makes me hopeful when you think of something like smoking cigarettes, how that's not as common among young people as it used to be. Maybe vaping has taken over, but like tobacco smoke cigarette is not like a cool thing anymore. So that we kind of got rid of that, so we could, get rid of some of the other cool things out there too.
And we had this national campaign in all these countries to get rid of that, right? And it's funny because the same companies that were, the cigarette industry, right? They're now big time financially behind things like vaping. And when you tell kids that, hey, this stuff is really bad for your lungs, it's really bad for brain development. Oh, whatever. The same things that we were saying in the 1950s or 60s to law enforcement and the government and all these into schools are happening right now. Like we are repeating ourselves right now. And it's going to be another 10, 15 years when the data comes out, and data is already coming out at record levels, but people refuse to accept it. But it's going to be another 10, 15 years when they're going to say, oh, I guess this was dangerous. And then there's going to be, unfortunately, a new flavor of the day, which is sad,
Yeah. And we didn't talk too much about it, but we can talk about it briefly. Like internet makes it way harder today too, right? Because kids can go online and purchase drugs on the dark web, or not even the dark web, right? But that's wild to think too, how it's can be right in your own house with the internet.
When I talk to folks, I tell them that if I were going to buy drugs, I wouldn't go anywhere. I would stay at my house and I would get on social media. I can buy drugs all day long on Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. And these kids are pretty savvy on the phones. I think at age 20, if you get on Snapchat, I think your hands start to freeze or something. I don't know if you're supposed to be on the app anymore. So the young folks, they know how to use these apps and they're very good at it. Right. And, it's scary. And I've shown that I've gone on Kick, different social media apps, and I show people how easy it is to buy drugs. It really is. And of course, we have the dark web as well, which there's a stigma to the dark web that it's just this nefarious place. So that keeps us off of it, right? I mean, you probably can't even access it from your internet at your work because your IT folks think it's going to cause all kinds of viruses. Well, criminals love that because it's not as dangerous and hard to get on the dark web as you might think. So they love that we're all scared to know anything about it. And we all think it's Harry Potter magic. So it allows them to continue on with their criminal activity. But yeah, social media.
Yeah, I actually,
sorry.
I actually wanted to touch on the dark web a little bit because social media is scary. And I don't know much about the dark web either. So that makes it scary. But is it as hard to track people on the dark web? Is it this lawless Wild West that they kind of portray it to be?
It's very difficult to track people on the dark web, but law enforcement speaking, we use the same techniques to go after these folks as we do other criminal organizations. Because ultimately, if someone messes up, let's say we seize a package, we're going to use the same techniques that we would do if we seized a package that was not from the dark web, right? But the dark web itself is actually not illegal to go on. It was actually designed by the U.S. government, their naval research, our Navy. It was to keep our intelligence assets safe. And some idiot realized that the anonymity and the safeguards that the dark web provides would be a perfect place to allow criminal activity to happen. So he opened up this thing called the Silk Road back around 2011. And it went on for about 2 years before they closed it. But now we have a number of dark web marketplaces. By the way, there's some specific to Canada where you have to live in Canada to order from them. But they're very easy to get on. They work very well. You can trust, unfortunately, there's a way you can learn how to trust what they call the vendors, the people that are selling them. It is incredibly easy to buy not only drugs, but just anything illegal. If you're looking for, weapons or a murder for hire or child porn or any of the disgusting stuff out there, unfortunately, it's available on the dark web. But going on the dark web is not hard. Like I said, the dark web itself is not illegal. There's a lot of good people on the dark web, a lot of activists.
I thought it was illegal. I was scared to even Google it.
No, it's I have a dark web training class, and I actually go on the dark web live, and I show people how to do it because there's a whole host of intelligence that we can get off the dark web and learn about criminals and the things that they're involved with.
Oh, wow. I learned something, new every day. I didn't know it wasn't illegal, like kind of what Katie said. I thought like even if you Google it, like dark web, and I don't know, is that even illegal to do? But yeah.
You could actually go on the dark web and buy your groceries. Now it would be stupid because you'd spend a lot of money and it wouldn't be worth it. But there's some legal things, there's a lot of activists on the dark web. There's a lot of whistleblowers on the dark web. There's a lot of, how do we get information out of places like Iran or Russia or China? When they regulate speech and free speech, how do those people have a voice, right? And the dark web does allow some of that to happen, and so there's a lot of good that comes out of the dark web as well. But unfortunately, like I said, people figured out how to exploit the good, and and you can now maybe Canada has a law that you're not allowed to browse these. Now I don't. Obviously, you can't buy the illegal stuff. That breaks all the rules there. But I use it for research all the time.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you just hear so much about it. It's like, yeah, Katie said, this wild, wild west. It's like you don't even, yeah, wild. Anyway, sorry, Katie, what were you going to say?
No, though, I was just going to say that's interesting. I didn't know that about the dark web. Yeah, I guess we're kind of coming close to the end of the time that we allotted. But I guess just if there's just one final thing that you wanted to say that we didn't touch on, anything that you, like a message you want to get out there, or just any kind of final things to wrap everything up.
I tell a story sometimes at the end of my presentations. It's called the starfish story, and I don't know if you've all heard it or not, but a little boy's on the beach and he's picking up starfish and he's throwing them into the ocean. And an old man sees him and says, "What are you doing, son? Why are you throwing these starfish in the ocean?" And he says, "Well, the sun's up and the tide's in, and you look around, all these starfish are stranded here. And if we don't get them back in the ocean soon, they're going to die." And the old man looks around, and there must be thousands and thousands of starfish all around the beach, all around the sand. And he looks at the little boy and says, "Son, there's too many of them. You're not going to save them. They're going to die." And the little boy bends over and picks up another starfish and throws it as far as he can in the ocean and looks at the old man and says, "I saved that one. I made a difference in that one's life." And that's a story that really sticks to me and is really powerful for me is what kind of difference are you going to make in the lives around you? Friends, family, loved ones, whoever, what kind of impact are you going to make in this world? And that's why I started only 2MG, was to, try to make some type of positive impact, and save that starfish, right?
Yeah, I like that story. That's definitely a good message. It's like, if you can't save everyone, why even bother trying to save somebody? Like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. So, yeah, thanks so much for talking with us. I definitely learned a lot. It was very interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll put a link in our show notes to like your nonprofit, and yeah, we'll be putting up the full interview, and really hope just people can learn from what you've talked about, because clearly there's so much that is unknown, and most people, unless you're kind of in it, don't really know all of the specific issues or the nuances of it. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us, and definitely learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you all. I appreciate the opportunity and happy to have done this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.